refers here to the Guizot Amendment, which is a law that was passed in the 90s in France and that was condemning racist and anti-Semitic acts. So the problem is that this law paved the way to others, and now each community, each lobby group requires its own Guizot Amendment and the sanctuarization of the piece of history by which it is affected. So we are facing a kind of memory competition. End of the quote. So to conclude, it comes out of my study that the way actors understood the past, at least the past I studied, is closely related to the social arenas or configurations within which they were positioned when they built representation of this past. And this is all the more true when these arenas or configurations were very legitimate for both its members and its outsiders, that is, in a very sociological sense, when this arena were structured and structuring for its actors. Or to say it in other words, the actors I studied experienced the past while belonging to particular communities of meaning, and their understanding of this past had much to do with how it was legitimate to frame it in such communities. It is thus crucial to study them for what they are and not to posit from the start that they are national and that's it. Thank you very much.
So, perhaps Professor Kuchen.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for this excellent presentation, and I would also like to thank you for the paper, which I read in utmost interest, and particularly that it covers a topic which is completely alien to the Polish context I come from, and also to the context of some other participants in this conference. Let me begin with a general remark on the title of the paper, right, which, as I understand now, is the overall goal of your thesis, as you said, a very wide rendering of what you want to do. It is definitely very wide, it's too wide.
Yeah, there was a mistake on... oh, okay.
Okay. And so then I was trying to design a new title for the paper, and that would have to do something with the institutionalization of slave trade memory and the teaching on the slave trade, perhaps. Yeah, that would be in a comparative perspective, which you are only trying to develop, since, as you said, you've covered the French case, and you're only starting with the British or English case. By the way, is this the British case or the English case? I know in the UK they have this, internal divisions of the educational systems. So whatever. Yeah. I understand you're focusing on England, which would probably include also Wales, but not Scotland. Yeah. Okay. Then the particular research questions which you asked in your paper and which you repeated here in the presentation for your analysis are very accurate, I believe, and you basically answered the questions in the paper and for most of the part in the presentation, so it's progressing very well, I would say. Now, let me have some critical comments now. While reading your paper, I was quite overwhelmed by the very rich language which you use, all those entanglements and interactions and stuff, which is perhaps a too complex way of rendering the very basic things which are happening. On the other hand, though, I admired your use of the word, the framing of memory, which links to, relates to Maurice Halbach's original thoughts. Then the use of the term the legitimization of teaching on slavery and the slave trade. I was quite puzzled why was it the legitimization word used here. I would rather talk about the legitimization of the historiography, and I would talk about recognition of history. You actually use this phrase, this word recognition in one or two contexts. What I found missing in the paper is a kind of a wider international and transnational set of references, because there were processes of the internationalization and transnationalization of primarily Holocaust memory. And in Eastern Europe, in the Baltic states, the communist crimes, the Stalinist crimes, although they were committed nationally, they became the subject matter of the interest of the new nation states. Of course, they had some transnational aspect. And of course, the Holocaust was itself a very transnational phenomenon, and then it was a matter of national memories and then of a transnational memory, including a European memory. Now then I ask myself, how is it in your case? To what extent was the very fact you're dealing with national or transnational? The historical background which you gave to us at the beginning of this presentation shows, and this is also what you write in your paper, that it was a transatlantic slave trade, right? Or was it also a transnational phenomenon? I would think it was, in a sense. There were, of course, various national agents, but perhaps also maybe transnational agents involved, like traders, right? But now it's for the various nations to stand up to this problem, right? To deal with this difficult past, right? And then you have to deal with the national or even subnational issues because you're dealing with education, which by itself is a responsibility, a task of nations or even subnational entities. So this sort of relation between the transnational and national for the subject matter, and also for the memory of it, and for the education on it, would need to be further developed, I believe. And then I ask myself a question: what is your position on this? Because you seem to believe that it should be more a national responsibility to deal with this past. Whereas the historians who started the whole process and other memory actors, they acted at an international and transnational scene. So this sort of self-reflection on your point could be developed, and also on the process which were taking place. In the paper, there are some very interesting analyses, which of course for the sake of time we could not give in the presentation, of the Taubira law, and I like it very much, and was very interesting to me. And you also refer there to the criticisms of Taubira by some politicians who said that the Holocaust, the Shoah, had already been commemorated. And when I was reading it, it occurred to me that perhaps the notion of the uniqueness or singularity, as Emmanuel Touré called it, of the Holocaust caused this criticism, right? There's just one thing to be remembered, the ultimate crime against humanity, the ultimate case of genocide, and why should we remember other things? Which of course is not an excuse. It doesn't explain why we should not remember other things too. Now the quote from the British website, this is not actually referenced in the paper that it's from a nationalist party. You said it's from the British Pride website, the one which you quoted. It was very interesting to me to see the case of a denial of slave trade, in actual fact, because there is some implicit denial in it. Or is it just a criticism of some transnational attempts at imposing a topic? Alright, these would be some of my remarks. I have got more, and I have even more on in the review mode to your paper, so I'd be happy to send both sets of other comments to you. Thank you.
Professor Vincentas?
Thank you very much. Thank you for your interesting paper and presentation. Before I begin, I have to say that I feel a little bit like an oddball or a black sheep in this esteemed audience, because as you heard, I work at the School of Economics and Business. I'm firmly rooted in the paradigm of rational choice, and therefore here I'm as far removed from my roots as I can be. So this means that some of my comments may sound quite illiterate to you, since I'm talking a different language. I hope, however, that this link that I will try to forge between my literature and what you have presented will be fruitful. So here are a few comments. First of all, I read your paper with interest. I find your question very puzzling and therefore worth exploring. How come these two countries that are so different on many levels have acted almost at the same time to do basically comparable things? That's a very good question. I admire your deep exploration, including in-depth citations of various politicians and academics. This is very good. But I want to say, from my point of view, the actuality or the importance of the paper could be enhanced if you could make more generalizable statements about why various non-governmental, in this case even non-business agents, such as museum curators, intellectuals, international organizations, working together are successful at changing government policy over questions that are conflictual. To put it differently, there are many examples when curators, academics, international organizations fail to change government policy. We know about dictatorial countries that do not play according to international rules, but even democracies, such as the United States, but also European countries, have a number of rules that they did not sign on to, regardless of the fact that they experience pressure from various interest groups to do so. So the interesting question is not just how things happened in France and in England, but why these two cases were successful while others have not been. Now, you seem to propose some ideas, three that I have noticed. The first one is that international organizations have provided legitimacy to this cause, therefore making politicians more ready to accept it or to deal with it. Another argument that these transnational networks have created a sense of international identity among people who are the champions of this cause, and therefore in both countries these networks were active, adding the international dimension, as well as the success, ultimate success of this undertaking. And finally, you had 2 points about relocalization, the friendly and the unfriendly. Now, that is fine, but all of these things, international organizations, okay, United Nations General Assembly. How many times has France vetoed something that United Nations General Assembly has proposed? Many times. Why this time UNESCO was successful? That's the question. International communities of scholars. How many times international communities of scholars want something and don't get it? Frequently. Why this time they were successful? And so I would like to propose some thoughts which are grounded in international relations theory, known as the theory of strategic choice, that might be helpful in either developing this paper, or maybe not, maybe writing a new paper along the similar but slightly different lines. So the idea here is as follows. Nations enter into various entanglements internationally, not opportunistically, as realists would say, I'll sign a treaty today, I'll break it tomorrow, who cares, only guns matter. Well, we don't sign on to this. But at the same time, nations are not slaves to these international norms. Just because a norm is there does not mean that politicians are going to accept the norm. So what I propose is that leaders of various nations sign on to international treaties as well as norms, as well as values, because they see value in it for their own political survival. However, these treaties are not easily discardable. They are like tying your hands. Once you have entered into a treaty, or once you have publicly endorsed a particular value that is being popularized internationally, or once you have publicly expressed a particular belief, then moving back is costly for you as a politician. One cost is so-called audience cost. If you have made public statements about a particular norm or value or organization that you intend to join, backpedaling means that either you made a mistake or you are an opportunist. Both of these things are not good for your political career. Another problem is the sunk cost problem. If you have, for example, changed your curriculum, you have invested money to do so, but more importantly, you have also invested people. You have trained teachers, you have overcome resistance, and you're not going to go back for these reasons because you have a cost that's already been sunk in this. Likewise, if you enter a military alliance and you only sign it on paper, it's not very effective. But if you have spent millions of euros on military training, with buying similar weapons and so on, you're more believable now because you have sunk costs. All right? So these international treaties, organizations, norms and beliefs, and note I put them so far in the same line, everything from NATO to international norms of slavery, so far in the same line. All of those things have the two features. Leaders enter them because they expect political gain from doing so, and they cannot exit easy. They suck you in. You cannot leave quite easy, because leaving has costs, okay, if it has any value. But there is a difference between explicit international institutions, such as being part of NATO or being part of the EU or some other organization, and the non-explicit ones, such as beliefs or norms that are being popular. And here's the difference. Treaties have very explicit statements about what a country is required to do, and even sometimes when a country can leave a treaty. So you can show to all your critics that you're being loyal to a particular treaty because you're doing A, B, C, and D. However, if you are the leader of a country and you publicly endorse a norm or a value that is being popular, it is not so clear if you're doing enough to conform to this particular norm, if you're not dragging your feet. And this, in my opinion, opens the window for various non-governmental actors to criticize the government on not doing enough. To a degree that also happened in Eastern Europe. When you think about changes that took place here in the early 90s, it was not all in favor of democracy and free market. Bulgaria and Romania, for example, paid some lip service to freedom and westernization, but maintained their policies very much in line with planned economy and not a liberal democracy. All right? However, this was criticized both from the inside and from the outside because the formal commitment that Bulgarian and Romanian leaders made to democratization was not a clearly defined process. You could say you're not doing enough. You're only going as far as, say, Belarus, and we want you to go further because democratization means something else. Now, therefore, signing on to norms and values is different from signing on to international organizations, opening a window of opportunity for various non-governmental organizations to exert pressure on politicians. And in this case, then, the question is, why would politicians listen to them? And one thing that I find missing from your analysis that might be interesting here is the general trend of the late 20th and the early 21st century towards postmodern politics. In political debates, manifestos of parties across Western Europe, you see more emphasis, especially in the case of left-wing parties, you see less emphasis on blue-collar workers, less emphasis on securing the rights of the underprivileged local population, but you see a lot more emphasis on human rights in general. Women's rights, sexual minority rights, environmentalism, and other such things. And my hunch is that legitimation of slavery is a part of that big segment, because once a government signs on to the general sort of postmodern vision of the world that rights matter, it's only a question of expanding these rights. It's only a question of shaming the government of not doing enough by various interest groups. Now, if this stood alone, in isolation of other issues that are typical for the emergence of a postmodern voter, and here we have a very rational calculation. If you are a left-wing party and if you want to win, and workers are generally not so poor anymore, you need new voting groups. You have green parties emerging, so you need to shift on environmentalism, etc., etc. So this is a rational calculation. quite outside, perhaps, of the scope of slavery, but once that happens, then slavery is an easy addendum to it. Okay? So I'm not saying you need to change your paper now, but I'm saying that I would be very interested, maybe even in sharing literature with you on these things and writing another paper later on. You would write a paper, you can thank me somewhere there in the credits, okay, about those things. Just an idea. And another thing about Central and Eastern Europe, and this is purely a matter of style of talking, you referred to a sort of common shock that communism was to countries in Central and Eastern Europe, approximately on page 2 or 3. And you said that we study those things as sort of national experiences, even though it was an international event that everybody experienced. And this is only partly true. Due to very diverse backgrounds of countries going under communism, communist regimes were distinctly different in countries that are not far from one another, both historically and geographically. Hungary and Czech Republic experienced entirely different types of communism. The Hungarian one was quite relaxed, while the Czech was very repressive, especially towards the end. So while I'm not saying that you need to discard international elements, absolutely not. I'm very happy that you're using them, but just for that one point, once an Eastern European expert is reading that, he'll say, well, but it wasn't really a uniform event. It was a series of different events that communism represented. I hope I have not
No, we have enough time.
Okay, no, but I think the main comments are done. Maybe we can have a discussion.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a mini lecture.
Thank you.
Maybe you would like to reply to both professors?
Okay, there was another question there.
Maybe someone? Yes, please.
Just two short comments. Thank you for this very interesting point of view, and also very original, I have to say. A few things. First, you wrote that you are interested in the way that schools are dealing with this issue. I think you should use the phrase by Wagner, Pacifici, and Schwartz, difficult past, in their paper about the Vietnam Memorial in Washington. I think this is exactly the topic that you're talking about. And I recommend a book by Irit Deckel, where she is dealing with the way difficult past is explained to or taught to school children in Germany, which is very similar to your case. And she's introducing the term memory career, which is, a moral career, which is basically saying that there is some kind of moral training that school children need to undergo in Europe. And this is very similar to the discussion you are having. In addition, following the beginning of your remark, Levy and Schneider wrote about multicultural memory. Basically, they argue that there is a moral memory code which is binding in the European community, and basically, to put it to try to make it simple, they argue that if you want to be a member of the European community, you are obligated to commemorate the Holocaust. This is something, you don't have to be sincere, you don't have to do it right, you just have to get it done. So this is something you basically have to comply with in order to be a part of the community. Maybe you should consider, perhaps this is connected to your case study. Is it something that you are obligated to say in order to be a liberal Western country today? So is there some kind of a political, moral obligation in relation to memory? And of course, as you mentioned, comparing this case study to the issue of commemoration of the Holocaust is perhaps a little boring, but necessary, because it's a very similar case study.
Oh.
Thank you very much for your very valuable comments. I won't be able to reply to all the questions, and for those where I try to reply, that would be very rough because I don't have that much time, but I would like to talk to you after to continue this discussion if you agree. For the very broad titles, the I didn't give any title in my application, so it arrived a bit late, that's why it was not long. It was investigating the transnational circulation of norms about the past, the case of the history of slavery and slave trade in French and English curricula. I'm sorry for the length of my sentences and the vocabulary. Sometimes I use legitimization is probably a French thinking, and I just translated and that probably didn't fit. I don't have any, my position on whether it should be a national or a transnational prerogative to make this curricula is that I don't have any position on the question, and I don't want to have any because I really want to I don't want to engage politically in these subjects as long as I will be studying it for my PhD, so that I don't get too emotional about anything. And about well, something that we probably relate to